Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today, carving an hour or so of your schedule to attend this webinar titled Getting Kids to Practice and Turbocharge Their Results, a Masterclass with Bob Phillips. My name is Giovanna Cruz, and I am an education manager here at Make Music. I am also a former music educator with 7 or 8 years of high school orchestra teaching under my belt, and then about almost 3 here at Make Music. I have my DMA in cello performance and was hired out of the classroom to work for Make Music with SmartMusic. So here with me are Lee Callistad and Bob Phillips. I will now give the word to Lee, not before saying that if at the end of this webinar you feel like you're interested in also learning more about SmartMusic, you can get a 30-day full access free trial if you go to our website and put Bob Phillips webinar in the comments window, in the comments field. But I'll remind you of that later on at the end of the webinar. So Lee?
Well, thank you all for joining. And this is, we all know as music educators that time is so precious in the spring. So thanks for your time tonight. We're looking forward to working with Bob Phillips on this session. Just quickly, my name is Lee Callistad, and I did teach music for 29 years, but was hired out of the classroom a few years ago. And along with Giovanna, we put together the online materials, the in-person materials, the clinics, and the conventions. And so we may have seen some of you along the way at different conventions. Just to introduce Bob Phillips, he's one of those people that just about everybody knows, but just briefly, Bob Phillips is an expert in the use of large group pedagogy and in the development of alternate styles for strings. Currently, Bob is the director of string publications at Alfred Music Publishing and is president of the American String Teachers Association. Bob has authored over 18 books that include 118 books for use in the classroom, and he has over 120 works published for orchestras and bands, and is an award-winning ASCAP composer. Now, the session, Turbocharge Your Students' Practice and Results, is a good chance to get to know Bob and some of his thoughts. And with that, we're going to turn it over to Mr. Bob Phillips.
Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for being here tonight. Really appreciate you attending. Let me just tell you before I jump into the content, again, my background, 27 years in public school, very large string program in Michigan. I also was assistant marching band director for 4 years, directed 25 musicals, and even taught a section of 4th grade PE 1 year, which you have to have lived through the 80s to understand that. But at any rate, and I did, a lot with the choirs, but was never actually an actual real, choral educator. So this whole issue of practicing is really interesting and motivation. And I'm going to share with you, the first part of tonight, I want to share with you just a little bit about what the psychologists are thinking about some of these issues. And then get into some really nitty-gritty stuff you can do with kids. And just sort of, and then we'll finish up with some really neat ideas of ways you can use technology to leverage this and this idea of getting kids to practice and also evaluating kids and how we can be, more effective with evaluation. So Mark Twain said, "The secret of getting ahead is getting started. The secret of getting started is to break your complex, overwhelming tasks into small, manageable tasks, and then starting on the first one." That's a quote from a great book that has about a third of it's about practicing, called The Musician's Way by Gerald Klickstein. Now, it's really for upper level. You have to be upper level high school and more, studio university people. It's pretty high level. But anyway, Twain's point is the thing that prevents most kids from practicing is they don't start, right? It's developing those habits. So let's just frame this discussion for a moment. Music teachers have a unique challenge within the curriculum, the school curriculum. We really have to get kids to hit 98 to 100% accuracy in order to be even moderately effective. If you propose that question to academic teachers, they would say that's impossible, but yet we really have to do that. So, a great exercise is to have your kids take a section of a piece that they know and they've already learned and they can play, and with a pencil, circle about every fifth note. Now have them go back and ask them to intentionally play that with the wrong pitch or rhythm. Well, if they do that, once you do that exercise once, you're going to find out how incredibly horrible the piece sounds. And that's an 80% success rate, or what most people in academia would call a B. Now repeat it and make a mistake every 10th note. It still sounds awful, and that's a 90% success rate. Then finally do it at 95%, finally 100%. It's a great advocacy thing to do at a concert. Before you actually perform the piece, take that section and show your parents what your goals are and how the kids have to actually have total mastery of the material. So it's also really effective for kids to see what it is they're trying to get to. Another thing you can do is take a section of music they can play and slow it down about 20 or 30 beats a second. And ask them to listen to it as if they're listening under a microscope. It's an aural microscope. And examine each measure they play for accuracy, for pitch, for articulation, for rhythm. Now just play it 10 beats slower and then at tempo. And of course, when they do it slowly, they uncover all kinds of things about inaccuracies with the articulations and various things that they can make better. But as it comes back to tempo, if they already know it and they can play it, it sounds quite good. Now you start increasing the tempo until they start making mistakes. And you'll find that as you go faster, students will realize that mastery totally depends on how they learned it and what tempo, and that drives everything. So to put that in a little bit of to frame that a little bit, I'll say it that way. Orson Welles said, if you want a happy ending, it depends on where you stop the story. Well, it's that same way with tempo, right? Greg Goodhart, who writes a lot about this practice issue, has a great website, ggoodhart.com, and you can go there if you want to kind of see some more things. He does also great residencies in schools and universities around practicing. Universities bring him in to teach their kids how to practice, and some schools have done that. So let's talk about what some of the psychologists are saying. I'm going to start with the book Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, written by Carol Dweck, who's professor of psychology at Stanford. And her whole premise in this book is that expertise is created and is not innate. That in general, even though we know that the human mind has certain limits and so on and so forth, but in general, expertise is something we develop, and it's not just an inborn thing. Basically, what she says that there's two mindsets that exist in people, in kids in particular, and there's two mindsets that exist on a continuum. At one end are the people that have a fixed mindset. They think intelligence is fixed and innate, and there's nothing they can do to change that. On the other end, there are people who believe success is based on hard work, learning, training. They have a growth mindset. And of course, through her research, she finds that people with a growth mindset have a totally different success rate than people with a fixed mindset. The idea is that fixed mindset people fear failure because it basically tells them that they're just not good enough, they're not smart enough. And as musicians, I think we can all relate to that, right? That music school does that to you. Well, I'm just not talented enough, I'm not whatever. But it turns out that probably what the reality is, it was all based on time on task, and those kids, that if they were doing better than we were, it's because they just spent more time on task more effectively than we did. Growth mindset people see failure as a learning opportunity and part of the process of getting better. They value persistence and gradual improvement. This should be really intuitive for athletes and musicians. So my whole point here is that you have to train your students and kids that success is up to them. They hold the key, and that key is called time on task or practice. We'll talk about how that looks in a few minutes. But the point is, the real sort of underlying point here is we deal with that as arts educators all the time. People have, in the general population, this incredible concept of fixed mindset when it comes to musical talent. And we really have to break that down so that they don't operate that way. Willpower, there's a great book called Willpower, Rediscovering the Greatest Human Strength by Roy Baumeister, who's a professor of psychology at Florida State, and John Tierna, New York Times journalist. And basically in there, they talk about self-control or willpower as a predictor of happiness or success in later life. And that willpower is a lot like a muscle. It has to be developed and trained over time. Self-control can be taught. And so one of the things we do when we focus on practice and teach kids how to practice, we're actually creating a mindset as well as giving them the ability to really exercise self-control over time, and willpower, and that really alters the trajectory of their life. I mean, I think if there's nothing else that we do in arts education, this is a life-changing event. Practice is absolutely a critical component of what we do. And it's sort of the most under-taught thing in the curriculum, right? Because most of us learn to practice using street knowledge. Our teachers kind of told us some things, but no one really sat us down in a prescriptive way and laid the thing out from beginning to end. At least most of us didn't have that experience. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is flow, and this is an underpinning of this whole thing. This comes from a book called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi wrote that. He's a professor at University of Chicago. And he really talks about getting kids to experience flow or optimal experience. It's the Goldilocks moment. In other words, if the material we're giving them to practice is just hard enough, if the music is just hard enough to create a challenge, then they get in this moment of flow. If it's too hard or too easy, they either get bored or frustrated. And so part of practice is that we have to be, as arts educators, extremely careful about what we're assigning and making sure that it's an attainable, appropriate goal for students. And so when you get in flow, is basically what that's all about. Is that you're so lost, you lose total sense of time, and you're doing an activity totally for intrinsic purposes. And when you train kids to practice and get them practicing, they start to get in this in flow, then what happens is it's such an enjoyable thing. Practice should not be a burden. Practice should everybody should be fighting every day with their parents. Please let me practice more, Mom and Dad. That's what we're trying to create. But a lot of times it's just the experience itself isn't set up correctly. So it should be about getting students to practice flow and leading them down that path. But kids need to be taught how to practice, how to break things down. They need feedback, and they have to see improvement so flow can occur. If they don't see improvement, then they just absolutely get frustrated and give up. And this really helps reinforce that intrinsic motivation I was talking about. Boredom is the enemy. It has to have enough challenge. That's the key, or not too much. Then you get frustrated. Okay, so I want to talk about one other sort of book, and that's a book called Peak. This just came out in 2016. Secrets from the New Science of Expertise by Andres Erickson from Florida State and Robert Poole, who's a science writer. This is this whole idea you've heard about over and over again, the 10,000 hour idea. And to be a world-class expert at anything takes 10,000 hours of dedicated practice. And that really came out of a book that Malcolm Gladwell wrote called Outliers. That's where that kind of hit the general media, is from that book. And Erickson says he misused that idea a little bit in the book. Erickson talks about there's three types of practice. Naive practice, which is that mindless repetition. Just do it 10 more times. It's got to get better, right? And that's what kids generally do. They either do mindless repetition or they just play. They're not practicing, they're just playing. Then Erickson talks about purposeful practice, which is well-defined and focused with specific goals and immediate feedback. And an important part of that is getting kids out of their comfort zone. So you have to give them, they have to have well-defined goals. This is exactly what I'm going to try to accomplish in this next 10 minutes or this next half hour. And there's a way for them to get feedback, whether it be self-analysis or somebody else, you, or whether it's with technology, but the feedback loop is really important. Then the next thing that's really important is this idea of deliberate practice. It involves all the things in purposeful practice, but it's based on proven techniques developed by past experts. So deliberate practice, we as arts educators, one of the greatest tools in our arsenal is we've got about 400 years of pedagogy that tells us how to practice, and also tells us, well, the actual pedagogy itself, whether it be, choral educators, or whether it be wind educators, percussion, brass, strings. We've got this enormous body of information about how to do that. And a simple way to think about it is the 3 F's: focus, feedback, and fix it. And the whole idea is to do this feedback loop of plan, do, reflect, and repeat. So SmartMusic and Peaksware their whole thing is based on having a specific goal, expert instruction, focused practice, immediate feedback, and then repeat. And so what are some of the issues? Well, you want to create a practice space that kids have to understand. You have to help them figure out where they're going to practice, when, all that stuff, and we'll get into details of that just right now. And there's a great book also I'll mention to you, Practicing Successfully, a Masterclass in Musical Art by GIA Publications. Okay, Giovanna, I'm ready for the next slide, and we'll talk about building a culture of practice. So practice culture, you have to build a practice culture in and out of class. Part of that is you've got to demonstrate how to practice a part with individual students or yourself as the model. You've got to ask the students to develop a personal list of strategies and try them. I used to love having kids keep a log of which ones were most successful, and we'd evaluate. But what I'm saying is, in class, you have to have a kid stand up, or you do this. It's better if you both do this. But at some point, you got to say, oh, okay, look, if we had 5 minutes and to practice with elementary students, let's say, I want you to practice for 5 minutes tonight. How would I use the time, and what does that look like? Okay, here's the 8 measures you would practice. Let's talk about it, about what we should do, how we should do it. Here's 4 strategies, and then you actually do it in front of them. Or you have a student do it and have the kids evaluate, how that was working. Let them come up with some ideas of how they would do it. That's a great class participation thing. But they have to see they have to have a visual and oral model of what practicing looks like. We talk about practicing, but unless they actually see it, feel it, taste it sort of thing, they just don't really quite get it. We talk about it, they go home, and we don't really know what they're doing. So it's really important. That's a first step. So one thing I would do is I would talk to them a little bit about these concepts I talked about: mindset, willpower, flow, deliberate practice. The idea that they can do anything if they just break it down and work on it. That they're capable of anything, and that everybody can do this. It's just time on task and focus. So then the big point I want to make here before I move on to some more specifics is that really, when you do this as an arts educator, you are shaping their future. You are altering their future, because you're not only teaching them to practice, you're teaching them to love learning. And this is the one thing, if there's nothing else, this could transform your ensemble and your entire school culture. So I think it's that important. Next thing I would do is how to schedule practice time. Students don't, especially at the lower levels, do not know how to practice time management. So I would actually I used to give students a weekly plan sheet, a time sheet, have them write down everything that they do, and we'd actually look at these things and say, well, okay, our goal is we'd like everyone to practice for 15 minutes every day. How are we going to get there? Where are we going to get the time? Where can it, and you actually have to teach them how to do that. Otherwise, they don't. It's just a kind of a wish. They don't really get down to the nitty gritty part of when to do it and how to do it. Then you have to teach them how to practice, how to manage practice time. And the way I like to talk about with kids is this is an investment, a time investment. So how are they going to invest their time during each practice session? The goal is to break down time into smaller parts with specific goals. And they have to stay focused. The whole issue of practicing, all the great pedagogues talked about this. Ivan Galamian, Perlman talks about it now. It's all about focus. that it's better to practice 5 minutes with focus than it is to do 20 minutes of mindless playing. In fact, 20 minutes of mindless playing does more damage sometimes than it does good. It's better they should practice for 5 minutes, take 5 or 10 off, come back, practice for 5, but it has to be with intense focus the whole time. And we have to teach them and build that skill and build that muscle, if you will. We have to show them how to build up their ability to focus by adding minutes to their focus time, over calendar year. And with beginners, it absolutely might be 5 minutes on and 10 off. Ultimately, we'd love them to practice 45 minutes, as long as 45 minutes, and then take 15 minutes off. Many of the great pedagogues felt that, and Glamian puts this in his book, Ivan Glamian, the great string pedagogue, that boredom is the enemy. That is the enemy. So let's talk about practice techniques for just a minute. You can give them a variety of techniques to use, but you can also have the kids. This is a great class project to develop ideas and have them, and once you do that one time with your kids, you wind up with, hundreds of ideas. So, the number one thing that we think about, the cognition people tell us, is to play it slow and perfectly. That you always play everything slow enough that it's perfect. And play it with multiple repetitions and slowly build up the tempo. The idea is they don't want to encode and I'm not going to get into to the brain research part of this, but it's pretty cool when you read about it. But they don't want all that memory encoding to be wrong, because it's hard to break habits that are incorrect. And once you get it wired wrong, programmed wrong in the brain, if you will, it's much more difficult. And this is what kids never do. They never start slow enough, and they don't do it in a way that ensures that they're going to play it perfectly. Then you can increase the speed with perfection, so on and so forth. All the ideas, and we're going to give you some examples of this in a minute, with dotted rhythms and, playing with dotted rhythms, note groupings. Play with different note groupings, like maybe 3/8 notes, 4/8 notes, 7/8 notes, and then hold the last note and add more to the group each time. Let's see, that's string specific, so I won't talk about that. Add a note, each repetition, add one note, like play one note, 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, but each time you loop back to the beginning. And sequences, playing a sequence starting on note 1, then starting it on 2, then on 3, then on the 4th note. Isolating left and right hand problems for instrumentalists or pianists. Let's see. I'm gonna skip the string specific ones. Adding accents to certain beats for string players. Reversing bowings, alter the bowings. Another one, we talked about this earlier, playing something super slow at microscope tempo, I call that. To see if they can really analyze every articulation, so on and so forth. Visualization, practicing the piece in their mind. So actually going through and doing a run through of a section in their mind, visualizing every move that they make with the hand and with the so on and so forth. There's been a lot of research studies on that you can actually, there have been examples of musicians that can do that in their mind, visualize, and accomplish just as much as if they have the instrument in their hand, which is just amazing. And particularly, I would think that would be equally powerful for choral educators too. I don't know that. I've only seen the research on instrumental, but practice with your eyes closed, so on and so forth. Okay, so let's move on to. Here's a couple more things before Giovanna changes the slide. Clear assignments with attainable goals. So we have to have very specific goals that are attainable. Give them something they can really accomplish in one session or in a weekly time period. Oftentimes our goals are too generic and aren't broken down and are not specific enough. They have to practice these 8 bars at 60 with 10 repetitions until they're perfect. They have to be able to do it 10 times in a row or 5 times in a row, whatever your criteria is. Then you move to 75, then you move to 80, so on and so forth. You have to play it 5 times in a row with no fingering mistakes. or with no breaks in the, split notes or whatever it might be. But the idea is that really clear, attainable goals. It's also important that then you model that for them, and that you a great way to do this is have students video themselves practicing, and then upload it to your site or bring it into you for you or the class to evaluate the success of the specific strategies. So you're evaluating their process. Okay, much like they're doing that, a lot of that in math, evaluating their process as much as they are the answer. So in other words, I am as equally concerned with how students are structuring their practice session as I am what the result is. So, and then students practice with teacher feedback. So in other words, take 20 minutes out of a class and have the kids split up around the room and give them a small assignment to practice, and it's mass chaos, if you will. But and then they can do, and you can go around and watch them and give them tips. They can also pair up with STAM partners, have their STAM partner evaluate their process and how they're doing, and then they reverse it around. You can also have them video themselves and self-evaluate. That's a really powerful tool. Have them video themselves on a phone for 10 minutes practicing, and then evaluate their strategies as well as the end result of the goal. So and then you document the progress using clear evaluation criteria and give students feedback as quickly as possible. And I'll just finish with this before we go into some real concrete examples of technology. The idea here is, my question is, what's wrong with all of our festival competitions that we go to? Well, one of the things wrong is if you're in a state where you go play for 3 judges, you get an evaluation sheet as well as tapes. The problem is now you go home and the kids actually don't care because the performance is done. So, a stronger model in terms of, the learning part of it would be if we could actually do that festival 2 or 3 weeks before our real performance and get evaluation and see where we're at, or at least do it at the festival and then come back, spend another 2 weeks, because the whole issue here is the evaluation part of it needs to be powerful. All right, go ahead, Giovanna. We can go to the next slide. And so I did that in about 30 minutes, and I appreciate you listening to all that. You get the idea. There's lots of ways you can get creative with this and find really interesting ways to engage your kids in practicing. SmartMusic is a great technology. In fact, some of the, I know Andres Eriksson has actually seen the SmartMusic technology and was just blown away with how well this feeds into deliberate practice. So we're going to just show you some examples of that, and I'm going to let the first one is specific goals. Setting specific goals, how you'll find your students measure and do success. And Giovanna, are you going to do the videos as we go here, right?
Yeah, I can do that, or I can just go through these 4 or 5 slides real quick just to kind of give the overview and how that.
Okay, I'll do. All right, let me. Yeah, are you going to do that, or do you want me to do that?
Whatever you prefer.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
You can back up to specific goals. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So like Bob was saying, and I think I turned off my video. We really think that SmartMusic inserts itself very well with the Anders Ericsson deliberate practice model, because with this technology, as a teacher, you can help the students set up the goals for themselves as well as the goals that you set for them. Then you teach them all of these practice techniques so they can go home and do that deliberate and focused practice, which is what's ultimately going to make the difference. And then the feedback portion is really easy to implement in the classroom because you're there to give them the feedback, or their peers are there to give them the feedback. But what happens when they go home? Who is going to give them that feedback if they don't have a private teacher, or if their parents are not musicians, or don't have a musical inclination? So here's where SmartMusic can come in and help the student by providing that feedback in 2 distinct ways. orally by recording the student and then allowing him or her to listen to himself, and then visually because they're going to see red or green notes depending on what they play correctly or incorrectly. So that's kind of the overall of what SmartMusic can do. We currently exist in 2 different ways. On the left side of your screen, you can see what the classic application, what the icon looks like on your desktop, and it's a downloadable program. And then the cutting edge new thing that we have is the new SmartMusic, which is web-based, which expands access for everyone. So all the examples that we're going to show you today in SmartMusic and the practice concepts that Bob has been talking about and will continue to talk about are in the new SmartMusic. So you get to see a little bit of how this works. So Bob, you can.
And we all know that more and more anything that the kids, in order for the kids to use it, so many of them, it has to be on a phone. That's just where we're going, or various. I mean, some people are still using the computers for that kind of thing and all that, but phones are really, really becoming pretty dominant in that world. So.
Yeah, and we're not on phones yet. We are on the web, and so as long as the student can access a computer with a Chrome web browser or a tablet or even an iPad or a Chromebook, they can use SmartMusic.
Okay, go ahead. No, go ahead. Practice techniques. So we're going to talk about and show you some examples here of how technology would play into this. So listening to source recordings is incredibly important because, again, that expert instruction, part of what happens in practice sometimes is they lose all sense of context. And so if they can play with a source recording, that can be a very powerful evaluation tool for them. So we're going to go through, and then we're going to show you how to do that, slow down, and doing the slow down part with technology, the gradual tempo increase, isolating rhythmic problems, isolating pitch problems, changing bowing, tonguing, and slurring patterns, data rhythms, and adding notes or measures incrementally. So go ahead, Giovanna, go ahead and start showing some video. That alone is powerful, and there's so much music from our school repertoire that is in SmartMusic that students can access, and in fact, a lot of people pick their music based on what's in SmartMusic. A lot of schools do that, and there's more added all the time each year. Yeah, let's go to the next one.
So in this one, what we can see is that we're going to pull up the clarinet part from American Overture for Band, and then we're going to use some of the tools in SmartMusic to show you how you can slow down, create loops to practice, etc.
I'm not seeing anything in the video yet.
So you can slow down the tempo. In this case, we're going all the way down to about half speed. We are going to create a loop now in this video so that you can see how that works, and then Bob, maybe you can talk about the practice techniques that they could use in this specific excerpt, which is Can you see it on the screen?
I cannot, but go ahead. Are you running it now?
Well, let me try this. I'm just gonna share my screen now, and now
There you
you
go.
should be
I
able
got
to
it.
see. Okay.
I got it. So, okay, this is a looping example. A great thing you can do in SmartMusic is to be able to set loops on parts, and this gets to this whole idea of being able to play it slowly over and over again until it's perfect. Play it slowly enough to be perfect, and then gradually increase it, but just isolate the part that they need to practice. So go ahead and just show that example.
Yes, and you're gonna forgive me for the quality of the sound because now I'm live on the web browser, and the sound is probably gonna go through my speakers and then back into the microphone. But you'll get the idea when you see the cursor moving. Additionally, you can see the fingering for the notes, and here the initial pitch, or the pitch for each note that you click on.
And that goes to expert instruction, right? So kids have access to the fingerings right there, right now, without having to wait till the next day to find out what the fingering should be if they're not sure.
All right, so I've slowed it down to 72. I'm just gonna click on the play button and you'll see the loop going back and forth.
Just the fact that they're playing it in and with a pitch reference is huge. It turbocharges their result. Absolutely.
Okay. So that was the idea of that video. I think this third one, you were gonna also talk about increasing the speed and isolating rhythm problems, which we can do with
Yeah,
the same
so
sound.
obviously we want to be able to take any particular passage and go from, as I said, slow enough to fast enough, and even then beyond. And, that's also a great grading rubric that some people use, which is to say, okay, the goal is we want to be able to play this at whatever, 120. But if you can get it at 90 and it's perfect, that's a C. If you can get it at 100, that's a B. If you get it at 110, it's a B plus, or whatever your rubric is. But it's a great goal for kids, very specific goal, and with all slurs, with whatever it might be, what you want to put on the rubric. But okay, go ahead.
So this one is just one of the exercises from Sound Innovations Book 1, where you can assign a method book line and have accompaniment, which would make the practice that much more interactive and fun for the students.
Right, and for all the instrumental teachers out there, just about all the method books are on SmartMusic, and this is incredibly powerful in developing these habits the first year of instruction and beyond. I mean, at least Sound Innovations, that series, they're on all the levels up through high school, but creating this discipline and this focus is just amazing what that does to first year players. You develop the patterns right away. So the idea is, you could hear just accompaniment, you could hear just a solo line, you can hear them together, you can loop them, you can change the tempo, all kinds of things that you can create specific written instructions of how you want them to do that. And you can even do that, for all the performance pieces, you can do that right within SmartMusic. Now, SmartMusic, one of the things they do that I think is amazing is all the performance music that's in SmartMusic. Music educators like yourself have been hired to go through and create all the assignments. Like if I was going to do this piece as a grading piece, here's where I would do where I would do that and what I would do. And you can create your own assignments and certainly create whatever you want, but there's already some pre-canned ones in there. And in general, we're all going to pick those same spots. It's not that it's not going to be that different teacher to teacher. The spots are usually pretty obvious. So that's a really powerful thing to be able to use for evaluation. Plus, these are great evaluation tools you can use with administrators to demonstrate progress, as well as parents. So the evaluation process is a little more concrete and a little less subjective.
So this next example is showing one of Bob's compositions for string orchestra named Aspire, and we're going to show you those predefined assignments that are built into each and every one of these large ensemble titles, both for instrumentalists and for choirs. So in here what you see is that if you're working on a piece like this, it could be a choral piece or it could be an instrumental piece, you can assign it to your students, you can define your grading criteria, both the red and green note assessment, and what you're going to grade based on the recording, like intonation or articulation or bowings or phrasing or whatever it is. And when you pick a predefined assignment, there's instructions in there with areas that have already been predefined by educators that Make Music has hired to write these assignments.
And you're not depending on the kids to remember when they go home. If you have a classroom subscription to SmartMusic, they actually have them all. They're all there, and you know that they're all seeing the exact same language, the same assignment, working at it in the exact same way for the same outcomes.
Yes. The next example is again from Sound Innovations, and in this case is a very technical, just a scale exercise. But again, in this particular exercise, you're going to get to hear a fun accompaniment to play with, the fact that you can record with that accompaniment. You're going to see that red and green note assessment that we were talking about earlier on. And then this gives the students the ability to record themselves and then listen to the recording. So you'll see that in here. That is there's the red and note green assessment, and then the recording that the student made of himself.
And for the kids and for parents. Because it's not, oh, well, I really played better than that in class, or I did this. No. This is what you did. And you had a chance to do this as many times as you wanted to.
You were getting stuff?
Yeah.
No, don't do
Okay, go ahead, Giovanna. Are you almost at the grading rubrics?
I can, yes, almost there.
Okay.
So this is another example from one of the more advanced sound innovation books, and in this case you have, for example, a shifting exercise.
That's a shifting exercise for string players. It goes first through seventh position in six bars.
So now that the cursor is just going through the menu bar at the top and showing that you can go to My Takes and look at the different tracks that you can turn on for the recording. And right now it's going to play a little loop of the shifting exercise. So I think now, for the sake of time, we do also have the Suzuki books in here. And we'll have a little video showing what it looks like. Basically, you have the music on screen, and there's also the accompaniment, which right now is a MIDI accompaniment. But we're working on trying to incorporate the actual Suzuki recordings from the Suzuki Association.
And that brings up the issue that there's lots of solo and ensemble repertoire in SmartMusic, which is a great way during solo and ensemble time periods to have kids working on those pieces and have context and evaluation and everything else, even though you are not physically working on that piece with them right at that moment. So that's a great resource. Just a lot of solos. Plus, for jazz educators, the scales exercises, the echo exercises are phenomenal for developing improvisation skills, so on and so forth. Okay, so we can go to gradebook?
Yeah, so I'm going to show you now the assignment loop. So we're going to see in this first video how a teacher can pick a line from a method book, for example. So again, we're going to just showcase sound innovations. And all the content available in SmartMusic, and then whatever content you bring in through the use of notation software, you can actually assign to your students. So let me just scroll forward a little bit. We're going to open an exercise from the book. And then you can either open the music on screen and assign from there, or just simply click on assign if you have the book in front of you and you know exactly what exercise you want to schedule out. You get to the assigner window, and you can basically type in your instructions for the assignment. Then you're going to get to the rubric evaluation page, where you can decide what it is that you're looking for. If you just want SmartMusic to grade it, then you select assessment grade, and the computer will do it all. If you want to grade other criteria like tone or intonation or bowings or articulation or whatever it is, then you're going to listen to that recording. You can establish that criteria as well. You can put additional instructions, set up each part the way you want it to look for each specific instrument. You can even listen to what you're sending.
And it seems like you look at that and you think, well, there's a fair amount of work there. Well, it's not. It goes really fast. But the big thing is, once you set up these things, you take a few days in the summer, you can have your entire year set up, and then it's there. You're only adding a few new things each year, whatever, new repertoire or whatever. But there's so many things in your method books and/or scales, arpeggios, things like that can be set up, and then you've got them forever.
Yeah, and then when the student receives the assignment, their interface is very similar to what you just saw. I'm going to scroll forward a little bit because we are getting close to 8 o'clock Central where I am. And so basically the student selects their part, and then they're going to see the music on screen. They can practice using all of those techniques that we have talked about for the last hour, and when they get to their best take, then they can submit that for the teacher to grade.
What I find really motivational about this for kids, I've seen this happen in so many schools. I've seen happen in so many schools is that the kids, because they're submitting this way, and they can do it over and over again, they just will not submit it until it's right, which is part of the goal in practicing, right? Whereas when they're just practicing for a live test, they go, well, I practiced enough, it is what it is, whatever happens, happens. But when they're doing it this way, it's amazing the lengths they'll go to try to get it absolutely perfect before it comes in.
Yeah, and then because it's technology, you know, and we do a really good job at assessing and all of that. Sometimes there will be a note that won't be picked up, or maybe the student feels that they did something better than the computer reflected or whatever. They want to be able to send a note. They can type a comment in, and then the teacher will see it. And in this video, you'll see the teacher logging in to grade. Let's see. All of the submissions are there where it says assignments to be graded on the left side of the screen. You click on the submission, and then you're going to be able to see the sheet music for what the student played. You're going to be able to see the red note and green note assessment. You're going to be able to hear the student's recording, and if they left you a comment, you can read that as well. And so if you're only using the assessment grade, it will be there, it'll be auto-graded. Now if you're listening for tone, then you have to enter in the grade or whatever other criteria you're evaluating. But it's a great way to have a record of what the students are doing and have documentation and provide that feedback that you can't otherwise provide unless they're in the classroom with you. And then once you've done all of that, all your students' activity or assignments, so to speak, is documented in the SmartMusic gradebook, which I'm going to share my screen here real quick. Let's see. So here's kind of what the gradebook looks like. This is a sample, so you know our students are not that bad that they're all failing. This is a sample gradebook where evidently a lot of assignments haven't been submitted, but you have a color code and then a clear indication of what means what, and then you have the ability to export that in a couple of different formats like CSV and Excel, so that then you can bring it into your district's actual gradebook. So with that, that's the end of my video. So I'm just gonna get back here to the PowerPoint presentation. Bob, if you have some final remarks.
Yeah, just a final thought, everybody. The whole first part of what I talked about are just sort of the ideas of how important it is to teach kids to practice, and that as much as anything, as arts educators, we want them to have this lifelong relationship with music. And when you teach them to practice, you're giving them the keys, if you will, to learning. And that's what we're really about, is getting them to self-learn. SmartMusic is all about that. My ultimate goal as an arts educator is I want to make myself not necessary, if you will. I want to be obsolete because I want the kids to be able to do that. And that's what this whole practice thing is about, is giving them the ability to figure it out on their own and to self-evaluate and get other evaluation. But you're the expert, and so that's where the expertise, that expert learning comes in, and so that's why they need you, right? But and this is also a little bit the whole idea of the flipped classroom, right? So those of you that are dealing with flipped classrooms in your schools. But bottom line is the ideas at the beginning, I think, if you think about those and work on those and develop strategies with your kids and your students, you'll find that it's going to turbocharge the results, and you spend a lot less time rehearsing music. You spend a lot more time playing and performing, because you don't have to spend as much time in class. And if we do too much of that in class, practicing it for them, then there's no incentive for them to have to practice it, right? So they need a reason to practice, and so we have to hold them accountable for that then. Teach them how and hold them accountable. So that's my presentation. Thanks a lot for joining us tonight. I hope you got a few ideas out of this, and appreciate everybody's time tonight.
Yes. Before you guys disconnect, I think Lee had some final remarks.
Well, just thank you so much for taking your valuable time and spending it with Bob and us this evening. We do have a series, a Wednesday night series. You can see it on screen. The next Wednesdays in May. Those are the topics. We're going to then regroup, and we'll have new topics for June. So in the chat windows, you did get some communications about where to go for information on our e-learning and our smartmusic.com for signing up for Teach platform. And if you do have questions for Giovanna and myself, we also sent that link a couple of times about emailing us at training@makemusic.com. So we're at our closing time, and thank you so much. Giovanna, last word?
Yes, and a reminder of something I said at the very beginning. If you're interested in trying SmartMusic, we have a free trial where you can see all the content for 30 days. All you have to do is request your Teach Free trial and just put Bob Phillips webinar in the comments section of the form on our website, and then you will be able to get your free trial. So with that, thank you again so much for your time today, and we hope to see you again in some of our upcoming webinars. Thanks again.